There's a particular kind of silence that surrounds invisible talent. It's not the silence of failure, it's worse. It's the silence of potential trapped behind the wrong zip code, the wrong accent, the wrong spotlight. This is where our story begins, in that suffocating quiet, with a girl from Manila who possessed a gift the world hadn't learned to see yet. Alex Eala was born into a tennis family, but not the kind that makes headlines, not the kind with Olympic medals framed on walls or sponsorship deals signed before breakfast. Her parents understood the game, respected its demands, but they couldn't open doors that required keys only wealth could turn. She grew up hitting balls on courts that cracked in the heat, training under coaches who believed in her with everything except the resources to prove it. That combination, faith without fortune, is a particular kind of torture for young athletes. By her early teens, Ayala was winning. She was beating girls with better equipment, better training facilities, better connections. She was doing the impossible with almost nothing, and somehow that made her invisible. The tennis world has a cruel hierarchy of attention. If you're American, European, or backed by the right academy, cameras follow. If you're from the Philippines, talented or not, you exist in the margins of the sports consciousness. Ayala lived in those margins for years. The International Tennis Federation knew her name, the junior circuit whispered about her potential, but the global audience, the sponsors, the networks that decided who mattered and who didn't, they hadn't noticed. She was winning matches, climbing rankings, proving herself match after match, tournament after tournament, and still the world scrolled past her name without pausing. What made this tragedy worse was that Ayala never complained. She never made excuses. She trained harder than players with 10 times her resources. She studied the game with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. She understood something fundamental that many privileged players never grasped. Opportunity doesn't arrive on a schedule. It comes once, maybe twice, and you have to be ready. She was preparing for that moment with every single practice, every sacrifice, every tournament played in front of empty bleachers. Her technical game was remarkable, a blend of modern power and classical precision. Her forehand carried the weight of determination. Her backhand slice could slice through pressure like it was nothing. She moved with purpose, thought with clarity, and competed with a hunger that transcended age. Scouts who actually watched her play came away shaken. They'd seen the rankings, the statistics, the tournament results, but watching her in person was different. There was something indefinable there, something that couldn't be quantified in serves or ground stroke speeds. Yet the machinery of professional tennis ground on without her. Sponsorships went to names with bigger social media followings. Tournament wildcards went to players with better representation. Media coverage went to narratives that fit the predetermined script. Ayala was too good to ignore completely, but not famous enough to pursue aggressively. She existed in that purgatory between the acknowledged and the invisible, and it was slowly becoming clear that climbing out might require something more than talent alone. But what if someone was watching? What if the greatest tennis player in tennis history saw what the world had missed? Roger Federer had spent decades understanding the game at a level that transcended mechanics. He wasn't just a player, he was a philosopher of tennis, a student of its subtleties, an architect of possibilities. When he stepped back from competition, the assumption was that he'd fade into comfortable retirement. But Federer never truly disappeared from the sport. He watched, he studied, he saw patterns others missed. In the landscape of women's tennis, Federer noticed something that had escaped the attention of established coaches, scouts, and media. He saw a player from Manila with a technical foundation to compete at the highest level, the mental resilience to overcome adversity, and the hunger that couldn't be manufactured or coached, only channeled. More importantly, he saw something that statistics couldn't capture. He saw a player who understood grace under pressure, who played with intelligence rather than just power, who reminded him of principles he'd built his entire career upon. The tennis world had become obsessed with one-dimensional metrics, serve speed, ace percentage, power rankings. But Federer had always known that tennis at its highest level required something else, an understanding of angles, of rhythm, of how to make the game bend to your will through intelligence and elegance. When he watched Eala, he recognized that quality. She played like someone who'd studied the game's history, who understood that tennis was chess played at 100 miles per hour. What followed wasn't an immediate public courtship. Federer operated differently. He had conversations, quiet ones. He reached out through channels that didn't immediately trigger media attention. He asked questions. He studied her interviews, watched her post-match analyses, observed how she spoke about the sport. He was checking for something crucial, not just talent, but philosophy, not just skills, but character, not just potential, but readiness. Those initial conversations revealed something remarkable. Eala understood the game the way Federer understood it. She could discuss positioning, court management, psychological warfare, not as abstract concepts, but as lived experiences. She had developed her own technical philosophy through trial and error, through years of playing against better-funded opponents and having to outthink them because she couldn't simply outpower them. She was, in essence, a self-taught tactician. For Federer, this represented something profound. In an era of specialization where young players were often molded into narrow templates by large academies, Eala had developed organically. She wasn't a product of a factory system. She was a craftsperson, and Federer had always believed that craftspeople possess something system-created players often lacked: authenticity. The decision to sign her wasn't impulsive. It was the culmination of months of observation, conversation, and conviction. Federer believed he could see something in her that the world had missed. Not just a player who could win tournaments, but a player who could change how women's tennis understood itself. She could be, he believed, a bridge between the elegant, intelligent tennis of the past and the powerful, modern game of the present. When he decided to make it official, he made it personal. He didn't send lawyers or agents. He flew. He wanted to look her in the eye, have a real conversation, make clear that this wasn't a business transaction. It was a partnership built on mutual respect and shared philosophy. Nobody expected this. The greatest player in history betting his reputation on an unknown from the Philippines? But the rumors were already spreading, and the internet was about to lose its mind. The leak came from somewhere unexpected: a hotel staff member's social media post. A photo of two figures in a private meeting room, the image slightly blurred but unmistakable. Is that Federer? The post exploded before hotel management could delete it. Screenshots circulated. Speculation erupted. Within hours, the rumor became almost too absurd for serious consideration. Roger Federer signing Alex Eala to his management? The tennis establishment's initial response was mockery. Who was Eala? Why would the GOAT invest in a player the world hadn't heard of? Conspiracy theorists emerged. Maybe it was a charity move. Maybe Federer was losing his mind. Maybe this was some elaborate marketing stunt. But then the official announcement came, and it wasn't a press release buried in fine print. It was direct. It was bold. It was Federer himself, sitting across from Eala, speaking about his vision for her career, his confidence in her potential, and his commitment to proving that greatness could emerge from anywhere. "I see in Alex something that can't be taught," Federer said in the announcement, his words carefully chosen but unmistakably sincere. "I see a player who understands the game at a fundamental level. I see someone ready to prove that geography isn't destiny." The tennis world fractured into factions. Supporters saw this as visionary, a legendary player recognizing true talent and taking a risk on a diamond in the rough. Critics called it reckless. How could Federer's reputation survive attaching itself to an unproven player? What if it didn't work out? What if this was the moment the legend finally miscalculated? The media frenzy was unprecedented. Every major sports outlet ran the story. Federer gambles on unknown phenom. The Manila Miracle, inside Federer's bold move. Is this genius or delusion? Social media exploded into 1,000 arguments simultaneously. Federer's previous decisions, his legacy, his judgment, all suddenly up for debate. In Manila, the reaction was different. For Filipino tennis fans, this wasn't just about one player. It was validation. It was the world finally acknowledging that talent existed outside the traditional power centers. Alex Eala had always been their champion in spirit. Now suddenly, she was the world's story too. The pressure that came with that recognition was almost unfathomable. The announcement sparked intense analysis of Ayala's game. Suddenly, every interview she'd ever given was examined for hidden brilliance. Every tournament result was recontextualized. Tennis analysts who'd never mentioned her name before suddenly became experts on her potential. The narrative shifted from "who is she?" to "how did we miss this?" Federer himself became a subject of fascination. What did he see in her that others didn't? Was he mentoring her, or was this something deeper? Was this about legacy, creating a player who could carry forward his philosophy? Or was it about proving that even at this stage of his life, his judgment remained impeccable? The sports world held its breath. This wasn't just about one player's career anymore. This was about whether the greatest player in tennis history could successfully transition from competitor to developer of talent. It was about whether talent could overcome geography, resources, and the established machinery of professional sports. It was about whether redemption stories could still exist in an age of predetermined paths and algorithm-driven attention. The world was watching now. Every move she made would be analyzed, every win celebrated as vindication, every loss treated as proof that Federer made a catastrophic mistake. The pressure was immense. But had anyone asked if she was ready? Success has many fathers, but failure is always an orphan. As Ayala began her career under Federer's management, every misstep became a referendum on the entire partnership. The backlash came from unexpected places. Some critics questioned Federer's motives. Was this genuine mentorship, or was it a tax-advantaged investment? Could a player with his profile genuinely develop talent, or would his presence simply overshadow Ayala's accomplishments? If she succeeded, would it be her triumph or his legacy project? The scrutiny was merciless. Other voices emerged from within tennis itself. Established coaches who'd spent decades developing junior talent questioned why their work went unrecognized, while Federer's involvement with an unknown player generated global headlines. There was resentment, there was skepticism, there was the particular bitterness that comes when the old guard sees resources and attention flowing towards something they perceive as a stunt. The media coverage became increasingly hostile. Every tournament became a test. Early wins were dismissed as playing weak opponents. Losses were treated as confirmation of fundamental flaws. The narrative that had initially celebrated the partnership began to shift. Is the Federer experiment failing? Headlines asked. Was this the greatest miscalculation of his career? Ayala herself became the subject of intense scrutiny that extended beyond her tennis. Her background was analyzed, her family was examined, her training methods were questioned. Everything about her was put under a microscope in ways that rarely happen to even established players. The attention that should have been empowering became suffocating. The pressure operated on multiple levels simultaneously. There was the pressure of actually performing at the professional level, winning matches, climbing rankings, proving she belonged. There was the pressure of vindication. She had to prove Federer right, had to prove the skeptics wrong, had to prove that the world's doubt was misplaced. And there was the pressure of representation. She wasn't just playing for herself anymore. She was playing for everyone from the margins who'd ever been told their zip code determined their ceiling. Some observers began to question whether Federer himself understood what he'd done. Bringing an unknown player into the spotlight and then subjecting her to this level of scrutiny, was that responsible? Were they protecting her or exploiting her? The discourse became moralistic. People argued about whether it was ethical to use a young player as a proof of concept for a theory, no matter how noble the underlying intention. The backlash extended to Federer's legacy itself. Social media became a battleground between defenders and detractors. Some argued that associating himself with risk diluted his aura of perfection, that Federer belonged on a pedestal, not in the trenches of developing an uncertain talent. Others countered that this willingness to risk his reputation actually elevated his legacy, that it demonstrated he believed in something beyond his own accomplishments. Within Eala's camp, the pressure manifested differently. There were concerns about whether the high-profile association was beneficial or detrimental. Every decision came under scrutiny: her practice regimen, her tournament schedule, her coaching staff. The presence of Federer's involvement meant that every element of her development became public debate rather than private evolution. The psychological toll became impossible to ignore. In interviews, Eala began speaking about the weight of expectation. She'd wanted to prove herself. She'd wanted the world to see her potential. But she hadn't anticipated how brutally the world would examine every moment, every choice, every result. The dream of being discovered had transformed into a nightmare of being dissected. She was cracking under the weight. The world was watching, waiting for failure, ready to declare the entire partnership a magnificent disaster. But she hadn't become a professional athlete by accepting limits. What was she willing to sacrifice to prove them all wrong? The tournament was selected carefully, significant enough to matter, accessible enough to be a reasonable challenge. Eala arrived with the weight of everything on her shoulders. Federer was there, watching from the shadows, observing rather than coaching. He wanted to see how she performed under genuine pressure, with genuine consequences. Her first match was against a player ranked significantly higher. The expectations from the public were contradictory and unforgiving. Some expected her to lose, to confirm their suspicions that the whole partnership was overblown. Others demanded victory, treating it as the only acceptable outcome that would justify all the attention. She won. Not dominantly, not decisively. She won the way champions win when the pressure is immense and the stakes are everything. She won with errors, with moments of brilliance, with spurts of panic followed by clarity. She won the way you win when you understand that perfection is impossible and survival is the only goal. The narrative shifted instantly. Suddenly, the initial skepticism was reframed as healthy doubt overcome. The tournament became a referendum on the entire partnership, and Eala passed it. The tennis world began to recalibrate its understanding of what was happening. But one victory wasn't redemption. It was a beginning, and Eala understood that now, more than ever, consistency was everything. She couldn't afford a decline. She couldn't afford to lose focus. The margin for error had been permanently reduced by the visibility of her situation. What emerged in the following months was something remarkable. Not immediate dominance, but steady improvement. Her ranking began climbing. Her matches against top players became competitive rather than desperate. She started winning in ways that seemed natural rather than miraculous, which was perhaps the highest compliment possible. Federer's role became clearer through observation. He wasn't trying to remake her game or impose his philosophy. He was helping her understand her own potential more deeply. He was teaching her that greatness wasn't about power or speed or any single dimension. It was about integration, about making all elements of your game work in concert toward a unified purpose. The media coverage began to shift from speculation to analysis. Tennis journalists who'd initially dismissed her started writing about her potential seriously. Former players praised her tactical intelligence. The narrative transformed from "can she make it" to "how far can she go?" What remained constant was the pressure, but Eala had learned to metabolize it differently. Instead of seeing it as oppressive, she began seeing it as evidence that she was doing something significant. The world was watching because the world had finally acknowledged she was worth watching. For the first time since the partnership began, the question wasn't whether it would fail. The question became, how high could she actually climb? Standing at this hypothetical crossroads, the question that echoes through tennis and through sports more broadly is not whether this story is inspiring. It clearly is. The question is what it means and what it suggests about the future of talent recognition, development, and opportunity in professional athletics. If this scenario had played out in real life, it would represent something profound about the sport's evolution. It would challenge the notion that talent must be discovered through traditional channels. It would suggest that geography, wealth, and connected lineage aren't prerequisites to reaching the highest level, that exceptional ability combined with the right mentorship and opportunity can overcome systemic disadvantage. For Eala in this fictional narrative, the partnership with Federer represents vindication. It's proof that the world she came from, the obstacles she faced, the years of training with limited resources, none of it diminished her capacity to compete at the highest level. In fact, it may have enhanced it. She learned to solve problems with intelligence rather than resources, to outthink opponents rather than simply overpower them. But the story also reveals something troubling about how sports operates. The fact that Federer's endorsement was necessary for the world to notice Eala suggests that talent alone isn't sufficient. It suggests that someone with global credibility must validate an unknown player before they're taken seriously. That's a systemic issue, not just a narrative quirk. It raises questions about how many potential champions have been overlooked because they lacked that crucial validation from someone already inside the establishment. For Federer, this partnership, if it succeeded, would fundamentally reshape his legacy. He'd no longer be simply the greatest player of an era. He'd be someone who recognized potential, who took risks on unproven talent, who believed in principles that transcended career advancement. It would add a dimension of wisdom and foresight to his already extraordinary accomplishments. The broader implications for women's tennis would be significant. A success story like this challenges the established narrative about where talent originates. It suggests that the traditional pipeline, expensive academies, wealthy families, connections to the existing establishment, isn't the only path to excellence. It opens the possibility that greatness might be emerging in corners of the world we've collectively ignored. It also raises questions about responsibility. If Federer had pursued this partnership and it had failed spectacularly, would he be responsible for derailing a young player's career? Would his judgment have been questioned? The asymmetry of power and resources in such a partnership deserves examination. The mentor holds tremendous influence over the mentee's trajectory, for better and worse. What this what-if story ultimately suggests is that the future of sports might belong to those who can see beyond the established structures, who can recognize potential where others see only periphery, who are willing to risk their own reputation on a belief in someone else's capacity. It suggests that mentorship at the highest level isn't about imposing a template, it's about helping someone understand their own authenticity more deeply. For audiences watching this unfold, the emotional core of the narrative is universal. It's about potential recognized, about barriers overcome, about someone being seen when they'd been invisible. It's about a legend using his platform not to extend his own dominance, but to illuminate someone else's. It's about redemption for overlooked talent and vindication for those who believed in it. The legacy question becomes, in an era where talent detection has become increasingly algorithmic and data-driven, is there still room for intuitive recognition of excellence? Can someone with Federer's experience and vision see something that statistics and rankings miss? Or has the professionalization of sports made such intuitive leaps impossible? Perhaps the most important question this what-if story raises is the one we ask ourselves. How many Alex Ealas are out there right now, waiting to be seen? How many talents are being overlooked because they don't fit the established narrative? And what would happen if someone with the vision to see them and the platform to elevate them decided to take a chance? This fictional scenario, while imaginary, points towards something real about sports, about talent recognition, about opportunity, and about the power of belief in someone else's potential. Whether this specific partnership happened or not, the principle it represents is timeless. Talent emerges everywhere. Greatness doesn't require permission, and sometimes all it needs is someone willing to look beyond the obvious and believe in what they see. What did you think? Could this partnership work? Who are the overlooked talents you think deserve the spotlight? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in second chances and underdog stories, subscribe to the channel for more narratives that challenge the established order of sports. Because the greatest stories aren't always found where we expect to find them. Sometimes they're waiting in the margins, waiting